The road to Nurabad wound like a lazy snake through the rolling hills, dust swirling behind the lone bus that crept toward the forgotten village. Samir sat by the window, his face half hidden by the collar of his jacket, watching the world slide past. He hadn't been here in nearly 20 years, not since his father's sudden death, not since the whispers began. Nurabad had never been an ordinary place. Even when he was a child, people spoke in low voices after sunset. They told stories of shadows that followed without footsteps, of voices calling your name when no one was there. His father used to laugh it off, calling them old wives' tales, but Samir remembered how quickly the laughter died in his father's throat when the power would flicker at night. Now, Samir was coming back, not out of choice, but necessity. His uncle, Arif, had passed away a month ago, leaving Samir the last piece of family property, a crumbling ancestral mansion at the edge of the village. The letter from the village council was curt. If Samir didn't come to claim it, the house would be seized. He had no plans to stay. Sell it, take the money, and never return, that was the idea. The bus jolted to a stop at the small square that served as Nurabad's heart. It looked the same, and yet emptier. The tea stall was still there, but the laughter was gone. The market stalls were few, and the faces that turned toward him were older, thinner, with eyes that seemed to weigh him against some invisible memory. A bent old man with a weathered face shuffled forward. "Samir?" he asked, his voice thin. Samir frowned. "Do I know you?" The man's cracked lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "I knew your father. I knew when you left. I knew you'd return." Before Samir could respond, the old man's gaze darted toward the hills beyond the village, where the silhouette of the mansion rose like a jagged scar against the sky. "Be careful," the man murmured. "The house remembers." The mansion was worse than he imagined. Its once grand gates sagged on rusted hinges, the courtyard choked with weeds, and the stone walls were blackened in places, as if touched by fire. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The air was thick, stale, and cold, colder than it should have been in late summer. Dust motes floated in the dim light filtering through the cracked windows. The furniture was draped in yellowed sheets, and somewhere deep inside, water dripped in slow, deliberate beats. He wandered through the rooms, memories brushing against him like cobwebs. The library, where his father had spent long evenings. The dining hall, where meals had always felt too quiet after his mother died. The narrow staircase, where Samir froze. From upstairs came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, measured. His chest tightened. "Hello?" No answer. He climbed, the wood groaning under his weight. At the top, the hallway stretched ahead, lined with closed doors. The footsteps had stopped. One door, at the very end, stood slightly open. Samir pushed it gently and stepped inside. It was his father's study, untouched, except for one thing. On the desk lay an envelope, yellowed but clean, as if it had been placed there recently. His name was written across it in his father's handwriting. Hands trembling, Samir opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with 4 words. "Don't trust the shadows." That night, Samir lay on the old bed in one of the upstairs rooms, unable to sleep. The letter burned in his mind. His father had died years before, so how could he have written something that was waiting for Samir now? Wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere downstairs, a door creaked. Then he heard it again. Footsteps. But this time, they weren't slow. They were running. Samir bolted upright, his heart pounding. The steps raced up the stairs, stopped right outside his room. And then silence. He stood, every nerve screaming. Slowly, he reached for the doorknob and twisted. The hallway was empty. But as he turned back toward his bed, his blood turned to ice. A long, dark shadow stretched across the floor, yet there was no one there to cast it. The days that followed were uneasy. Elina tried to settle into the house, unpacking boxes, cleaning the dust from the windows, making weak coffee in the ancient percolator, but the locked oak door at the end of the hallway refused to leave her thoughts. The scratching came every night, always after midnight, always followed by the same whisper. "Elina." She told herself it had to be a trick of the mind. Old wood shifting, the wind pushing through cracks, but each time the voice spoke her name, the sound carried a strange familiarity, almost like her grandmother's voice, but not quite. On the fifth night, she woke from a nightmare. In it, she had been standing in the cellar, the air thick and damp, surrounded by rows of glass jars filled with a black, pulsing substance. Something in the darkness had whispered, "You promised not to come here." She couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than a dream. By the seventh night, Elina noticed something strange. The portrait of her grandmother above the fireplace had changed. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, the shadows falling differently, the flicker of candlelight, but then she realized the eyes in the painting were no longer looking straight ahead. They were looking at her. She backed away, heart pounding, until her heel touched the rug in front of the locked door. That's when she heard it again, the frantic scratching. But now it was louder, more desperate. And beneath the scratching was another sound. Breathing. On the ninth night, she decided to test something. She pressed her ear to the keyhole. "Hello," she whispered. The scratching stopped instantly. For several seconds there was silence. Then, very slowly, a voice replied from the other side. "It's cold down here, Elina. Let me out." Her chest tightened. The voice sounded wrong, raspy, uneven, and wet, as if it was trying to form words it hadn't spoken in years. She stumbled back, knocking over a table. By the time she worked up the courage to look again, the house was silent. On the 11th night, she dreamed of her grandmother again. Only this time, Margaret Mason was standing at the foot of her bed, wearing the same black dress from the portrait. Her skin was pale, her hair neatly pinned, and her mouth moved without sound, until, suddenly, her voice filled the room. "Don't open it before the 13th night. Promise me." When Elina woke, she found a single muddy footprint at the end of her bed. Finally, the 13th night came. Elina sat in the hallway with a lantern, the iron key from the brown paper bundle in her hand. The wind outside screamed against the shutters, and the grandfather clock struck midnight with a deep, echoing chime. She took a deep breath, slid the key into the lock, and turned it. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The smell hit her first, damp earth, rot, and something metallic. The cellar was larger than she expected, the stone walls lined with shelves holding jars of strange herbs, rusted tools, and stacks of yellowed paper. Cobwebs draped across beams, and the air was unnaturally cold. In the center of the room was a wooden chair, and in that chair sat a man. At least, he looked like a man at first. His skin was pale and stretched tight over sharp bones. His eyes were milky white, and his lips were cracked and bleeding. Thick chains wrapped around his chest and arms, bolted to the floor. When he lifted his head, the sound was like dry paper tearing. "Elina," he rasped. Her legs felt frozen. Who are you?" His smile was thin and terrible. "I'm family." He told her a story she didn't want to believe. Years ago, before Elina was born, her grandmother had a brother, Victor Mason, who had been a gifted man but obsessed with the occult. He believed he could make a pact with something beyond the human world, something that would grant him knowledge and life everlasting. But the ritual went wrong. What came into Victor was not life, but something hungry, something that whispered in the dark and devoured the soul from the inside. Margaret had trapped him here, bound by chains and wards, to keep the thing from leaving. "She promised me she'd let me out when the time was right," Victor said, his voice growing smoother, almost hypnotic. "Now she's gone, but you can keep her promise." Elina's mind raced. The scratching. The voice in her dreams. The note saying she'd need the keys sooner than she thought. She stepped back. "You're lying." His expression changed, the smile stretching impossibly wide. "Then why did she make you come here? Why did she wait until now?" The lantern flickered. Somewhere in the shadows, something moved. A shape, too thin, too long, slid across the wall, though Victor hadn't moved. "Elina," the shadow whispered, in her grandmother's voice this time. Please. Her instinct screamed to run, but her feet carried her forward. She touched the chains. They were ice cold, vibrating faintly, as if alive. Victor's milky eyes locked onto hers. Just take them off. You'll never be alone again. The shadow swelled, filling the edges of the room. The air thickened, pressing against her skin.
For a moment, she thought about it.
About the truth, whatever it was, hidden behind decades of secrecy. About the loneliness she'd carried since childhood. Her fingers found the lock on the chains. And then, she heard her grandmother's voice again, this time sharp and furious. Elina, if you do, you'll never leave this house. Elina dropped the key and bolted up the stairs, slamming the oak door behind her. She turned the iron latch and shoved the heavy cabinet in front of it. The scratching started again immediately, violent, desperate, and the whisper rose to a howl. Elina! 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 The walls shook. The portrait of her grandmother crashed to the floor. The glass shattered, and behind the canvas was a single piece of paper. On it, in her grandmother's handwriting, were the words, "The lock must never be broken. The 13th night resets the seal. Do not fail." By morning, the house was silent. The scratching had stopped. But Elina knew it wasn't over. The chains downstairs might hold for now, but one day, someone else might hear the voice and open the door. As she left the house to head into town, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. For a split second, her eyes were milky white.